Well, it's getting to look a little bit like Christmas, and actually maybe a little too much like Christmas weather, which is why I am not with you this morning. But thankfully, there is still something that is happening today, and still something we need to celebrate together. You may think of this as the Sunday after East Thanksgiving, the Sunday after we all just collectively ate way too much. Some of you may know that this is actually the first Sunday in Advent. And some of you who got extra credit on all of the homework know that this is actually something else too, which is Christian New Year. As Christians, we practice what we call the liturgical calendar, and it actually starts today. It starts with Advent, and then runs through the next 12 months. Now, you may wonder, why do we start it here? I mean, after all, wouldn't Christmas Day be a better time for us to do that, since that's the day Christ actually showed up, and as Christians, that's kind of a big deal for us. Well, we don't start there, we start here. We don't start with the birth, we start with the anticipation of the birth. And this period that we are going through, this period of anticipation for Advent, is important to us, and it's an important part of our practice. Because actually anticipating, waiting for God to do things is a quintessential part of what it is to be a Christian, what it is to follow Christ. It's a lot about anticipating. So we enter this season to anticipate the coming of Jesus. Now, as human beings, we actually like to anticipate things. They've done studies on brains and all that stuff that they do. And we have, through that, know that sometimes actually the pleasure, the excitement we get out of anticipating something happening usually far exceeds the thing actually happening itself. And the Christmas time is a perfect time to remember that. Because how much excitement was there for you growing up when you had to look at the presents under the tree, right? Like day after day they were there, and sometimes they grew and sometimes new ones got added, and you're like, I don't know what's in that colored box, but I'm really excited to find out. Right? We love that process of anticipation. And sometimes we actually love the process of anticipation so much that it exceeds what joy we actually get out of having whatever it is that's under the tree. Now, today's scripture is actually a story about anticipation, and it demonstrates the two ways that people, two major ways that people often approach something perhaps unexpected coming, or something happening where we're not sure what life's going to be like on the other side of it. And we get this story through the eyes of Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Now, this is actually the first characters we're introduced to in Luke's gospel. This is very, very early, if you noticed, in Luke's gospel. And we're introduced to these two people who are anticipating a child, not Jesus, but John, who would come before Jesus. Now, Zachariah and Elizabeth are, we're told, very wonderful people, fairly stand-up people. They had followed all the rules that they were expected to follow. They were well-liked and well-respected, and yet they didn't have any kids. And they didn't have any kids in a time when having children, especially having like a lot of children, was seen as a blessing. It was seen as a sign of stature and respect. It was seen as a sign of prosperity. So we have these two folks who otherwise everyone looked at as fairly wonderful folks who had never had the opportunity to have kids. Now, Zechariah was part of a priestly class, and there were so many of these folks that they couldn't all be priests all the time. So what they did is they divided the year up into little chunks, a week at a time, and folks would come in groups and serve in the temple and do all the things that priest does, and then go home to their kind of regular lives after that. It's kind of was like the temple equivalent of like the army reserves, right? Like 2 weeks a year and 1 week a month or whatever that is. It was kind of like that, but it worked. And this was Zechariah's time, and so he had to go and perform the functions of a priest, and so that's what he's doing in this passage. And interestingly, the highest honor in doing this was getting to go to the most sacred of sacred places and do one of the most sacred of sacred things, which was lighting incense and giving it as an offering to God in this sacred and holy and special place. And while Zechariah is fulfilling that function, the most sacred and holy function of his tradition, that God shows up through the presence of this angel and gives him this important message. And what I find infinitely fascinating is that while Zechariah is in the holiest of holy places, doing the holiest of holy things, he seems completely surprised that God actually showed up. But God did. God showed up and gave him a rather unexpected message, which is, hey, by the way, this thing that you've been waiting for and hoping for your entire life, this thing that you've actually given up on as an idea, is going to happen. You and Elizabeth are going to have a child. And of course, Zechariah, being the upstanding religious leader that he is in this holy and sacred place, says to the angel Gabriel, of course, and we're so excited about it. Except not. That's actually not what he did. Instead, he starts to argue a little bit with the angel in the sacred holy place and be like, well, how could this be? Like, that can't possibly happen. We're too old, this, that, and the other. So much so that you can almost kind of sense Gabriel's frustration in this. He gets a little testy. And he's like, all right, here's what's going to happen. Everything I told you is going to happen is still going to happen. But first, you're going to have to be mute until it does. Just so you remember who's who in this little thing that's happening right now, who you are and who God is. Now, as soon as we're done with Zechariah in this story, we're then immediately, the scene sort of shifts to Elizabeth, who seems to have no problem accepting the news of what's going to happen to her and is just excited about it from the beginning. And I think this sort of shows us, this one story, it kind of shows us this kind of basic human thing that happens when we are anticipating something big. We are sometimes tempted to focus on the negative, all the reasons why this thing can't happen or shouldn't happen, or all the bad things that may happen because of it. And there's a temptation to focus on the positive. What's now going to be possible? What does this new thing, this new chapter, this new blessing that is entering our lives going to mean for us? Right? And this especially turns up in places where we don't really know what happens or what life is going to be like on the other side. For those of us who've had the opportunity to be parents, especially with the first child, you probably know what this is, right? Like, you can have this idea in your head of what it is to be a parent, but until that kid shows up, you just really don't know. The other one that the other place this tends to show up that a lot of people, most people have experienced, is when we're moving, right? And maybe not just moving across town, but moving like far away. Maybe it's a job, or you're going away to school, or you're retiring and you're moving to Florida, or whatever it is, right? You know that there's this date on the calendar where something's going to happen. Your whole life is going to get packed up and put on a truck. And where you are now is you're not going to be there anymore. And a few days after all of your stuff goes on the truck, you're suddenly going to be somewhere new. And maybe you visit there, maybe you know something about it. But the truth is, you don't really know what life is going to be like on the other side of that move until you get there. So how do you anticipate? How do you spend that time between this place and moving day? What do you spend it fixated on? What do you concentrate on? Are you fixated on all the ways that things could go wrong? Are you fixated on all the tasks that need to be completed and the busyness and that we got to do this, we got to do that, and we got to clean the baseboards, we got to get the household, we got to do all these things? Is that where you're spending most of your time? Or are you thinking about the opportunities that are going to be present in the new place? Who you're going to live next to? What new food there's going to be to eat? What new places are going to be explored? Now, all of us are going to spend time in both of these places, right? We have to take care of the work to make sure that we actually have something to put on the moving truck when it comes. But we can't only do that. We can't only fixate there. We also have to look forward and look towards the blessings that are going to be possible in this next chapter. Now, anybody who moves knows it's fraught with challenges. My wife and I, when we were leaving seminary to take our first appointment, we had hired this moving company to move us, and we found them online, and they were, one of the first ones that we called that actually answered the phone, and they said, like, sure, we'll come move you, no problem. And so we booked the appointment, and we got everything packed up, and the day finally arrived, and we're all excited, and we're like, okay, now's the day. We're going to be done here. We're going to move here. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we called them, and they're like, oh yeah, they're coming, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and finally we got a phone call well into the afternoon saying, is it okay if they come tomorrow? Like, well, actually, it kind of wasn't. We had plans, we had travel, we had hotel, but it's like, okay, well, we can't go till our stuff's loaded, so fine. So we called the hotel and rearranged all that, and then we said, okay, and we busted out a few things. We actually had a place to sleep that night. And then packed it all back up in the morning. And my wife, who was pregnant at the time, and our young son, went down to the park to play for a little while because we were promised the moving company was going to be there at 9:00. And then sure enough, at the crack of like 9:30, this group of guys rolls up and they unload, and these three guys come up and they walk around our apartment and see everything they need to put into boxes, and they see where the trailer is parked that it's all going to be loaded into. And they come back downstairs, and I'm standing on the porch, and the guy looks at me and he's like, yeah, this is more work than we want to do. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to help you. And walked away. My wife, I can see down at the park that was a half a block away, looks at me with this quizzical look like, what's going on? I totally confess I probably said some things to these people in an elevated voice that were very unpastoral. And watch them get in their car and drive off while my wife is walking down to me going, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? Thankfully, at this point, things like smartphones had been invented, so we quickly start Googling, and we call the next person in line, and we explain to this guy on the other end of the phone, frankly, me in near tears, about what is going on, and that, we'd hired this company, and they weren't able to do it, and oh my gosh, and can you help? And the person on the other end was like, look, normally we're booked about a couple of weeks out, but it's kind of slow right now, and we've got some folks who really are looking for some work. So let me see if I can put a crew together for you. And sure enough, they did. And within 2 hours, this group of people from this other moving company came and started loading all of our stuff. And loaded our stuff really, really fast because they knew we needed to get out of there. When the guy came to finally give me the paperwork so I could pay the bill, he's apologizing to me for what the other company had did. And he's apologizing to me for how they make their industry look. And he's like, we're really sorry this happened to you. So we're discounting our rates 10% and not charging you the same day fee. We hope your move goes well. Which part of those stories do you live in? Which part of those stories do you dwell on? Do you dwell on the part where it didn't go well? Do you dwell on the part where we got mad at people, where you're disappointed in people? Or do you dwell on the part where really great people stepped up? Do you dwell on the part where you received a blessing you weren't expecting to receive? When we anticipate something, especially something big, and frankly, what could be bigger than the coming of the Messiah, right? But when we anticipate something, our minds are really good at imagining both sides. the worst thing that can happen and the best thing that can happen. Where are we going to invest our time? This season of Advent, as we're preparing for Christmas, preparing for the coming of Jesus, where are we going to invest our time? Are we going to spend all our time thinking about the busyness and all the things that have to be done and the parties that have to be attended and the presents that have to be brought and the things that have to be wrapped and the lights that have to go up and oh my gosh, how's it all going to get done? Are we going to spend our time thinking only about that? Or are we going to spend our time remembering the blessing that we know is coming? Are we going to spend our time anticipating God showing up in a new way and maybe doing something new in our lives? Are we going to open ourselves up to that possibility? How we anticipate says a lot about who we are and also says a lot about what we expect of God. Are we standing in the holiest of holy places, in that holiest of holy moments, and going to be completely surprised when the Holy Spirit shows up? Or are we going to anticipate the blessing that comes with this season? The opportunity to be with family, the opportunity to show love and to share gratitude with one another. That is our test. And that's why we don't start with the birth. And we start at Advent. And we start in the season of anticipation. Because how we get to the birth, how we get to Christmas, is as important as what we find when we get there. So my invitation to you is to anticipate well. Take care of all the things. Do the things that need to be done. Attend the parties and wrap the presents. Those are important. But also, in spite of all the busyness, remember the blessing. Concentrate on the blessing. Anticipate the blessing. Because that is the reason for all of this thing we are doing. And if we do that, no matter what happens, no matter if the presents don't get bought or they're not liked or the parties don't work out or whatever it is, we know we will arrive at Christmas the way we were supposed to arrive, which is ready and able to receive the blessing of God coming to earth to be with us. So may you have a blessed Advent season.